All right, in this video, we're going to be talking about the money market and the money market graph. Like every other graph, well, not every other graph, like most of the graphs we've done, it is basically a supply and demand graph. And it's a supply and demand graph for the money in the economy. But Devo, we already have one of those. You taught us the loanable funds graph. Yes, I did. But there are some differences that we are going to need to go over. And in truth, on the AP test, you're going to need to be, you're going to be asked to do both. So here we have a money market graph right here, where we have quantity of money, nominal interest rate, supply of money, demand for money. So nominal interest rate, quantity of money. And this would be the equilibrium nominal interest rate. Note that the supply of money is vertical. If you look at the loanable funds graph, which we've done, that is real interest rate, quantity of loanable funds, and the supply is upward sloping. We'll get to why that is in a second, but they are different graphs. So when you are asked to do the money market graph, make sure you do that one. That one right there. Okay, so let's construct it. We will start with that. Yeah, okay. So we have quantity of money. We have nominal interest rates. And the first thing I want to do is the demand for money. And the demand for money is downward sloping. It's D sub M. There are actually a couple reasons for this, and there's a couple of things you need to know. There are actually two kinds of money, two kinds of demand. In other words, we demand money for two different reasons. We demand money because it has value, so we demand it as an asset. We call that asset demand. That's like stuffing money under your mattress, or just if you have a jar that you're putting quarters into or whatever, you're saving money so you can have wealth in the future. You're not actually spending it. You're demanding it because you want to accumulate some over time. If there was deflation, that money would actually increase in value over time. So holding on to it is a good idea. And then the other kind is transaction demand. Now, the thing you need to know about transaction demand. Good job, Tony. All right, transaction demand is that's the demand that you have for money to buy stuff, and it is unaffected by interest rates. So if we were to just graph the transaction demand for money, we have nominal interest rates, quantity money. The transaction demand would look like this. Okay. In other words, there'd be a quantity of demand that's independent of nominal interest rates. You don't care about the interest rates when you are thinking that you want to buy a new car or a new video game or whatever. You're just thinking about how much money you need to buy that thing, and that's transaction demand. And so it is unaffected. However, asset demand is affected. See, at really high interest rates, the opportunity cost of having money stuffed under your mattress, like thousands of dollars you have in a little baggie in your closet or whatever, the opportunity cost is very high. Because if the interest rate is, say, 5, 6, 7%, what's happening is you're losing that. You're better off putting your money in the bank. And so the asset demand for money at high nominal interest rates is very low. But when nominal interest rates are very low, the asset demand for having money is higher because there's very little cost. Like Bank of America or Wells Fargo or whatever offers you 0.5% interest on a savings account. That might not be worth it, especially if there's fees associated and just the hassle of having your money be inaccessible or less accessible than just holding on to stacks of money. So the demand for money is downward sloping. That's why. Okay. The supply of money is a vertical line. And the reason why it's different, more importantly, than the loanable funds graph, where the supply of loanable funds upward sloping is, loanable funds is only money in banks. Only money in banks. Meaning, at higher interest rates, you are going to want to put more money in banks. However, at higher interest rates, you will put money in banks, but it's still going to be part of the money supply. So I take my money and I have it in my hand and I put it in the bank in a checkable deposit. It's not changing the supply of money because if you remember from the last video, they're both M1. So if I take my cash and turn it into a checkable deposit, I'm not changing the supply of money. So interest rates will affect the composition of the money supply. There'll be more loanable funds and less liquid cash, but it won't affect the overall money supply. The overall money supply is going to be affected by the Federal Reserve. They basically, and you'll see later, they just dump money into banks, and then this will shift outward, like so. And we will get SM2. And what you can see from this is the interest rate falls. When the interest rate falls, investment spending increases. This is going to be monetary policy that we'll talk about later. Not right now. So that's the money market graph. It's just supply and demand for money. And keep in mind that if you take money and put it in the bank, you're not changing the supply of money, but you are changing the amount of loanable funds. So like, let's say that happens. We all freak out about cash and we all think that cash is bad and savings accounts are good. So we'll put our money in the bank. Nothing's going to happen here, at least immediately. But eventually, maybe. But what will immediately happen will be an increase in supply of loanable funds. And as a result, this will shift out and there'll be a lower real interest rate. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to go over for when it comes to the money market is the book talks about the relationship between bonds and interest rates in a very confusing way. So bond, if you remember we've talked about, is basically an IOU. Then there are corporate bonds. Well, for now, we'll just deal with treasury bonds. That's an IOU from the federal government with a fixed return. Okay? So, if you buy a $50 bond and it's going to cash out in 5 years for $100, then that's going to be a fixed return. It's going to be a fixed growth rate every year. Interest rates are obviously not fixed. So the reason why the book talks about bonds and interest rates are kind of opposite of each other. So when IR goes up, prices go down, and when IR goes down, bond goes up. Kind of the reason for that is there's a lot of different reasons, and they talk about the book talks about people attempting to make up for the shortage of cash by selling bonds to try to accumulate cash, and that drops the price of bonds, which is true. Just consider this. Bonds and interest-bearing accounts, if you consider them competitive products, when interest rates rise, bonds are not as good of a value. It's a fixed return. It's 2%, say, right? Or whatever. But when interest rates rise, then the interest rate might be the more attractive option. So you will sell bonds to put money, if you have some bonds, you'll sell them to get that interest rate by putting your money in an interest-bearing account. The selling of the bonds drops the price of the bond. The opposite is true. When interest rates go down, fixed return bonds seem more attractive. So people will pull their money out of interest-bearing accounts and attempt to buy bonds, which is, if you think of supply and demand of bonds, it would just drive up the price of bonds. Okay, so that's that. If you had trouble with how that was worded in the textbook, that's just remember this. If you're taking college finance or college economics, and you want a more detailed explanation, you can ask your professor then, or read different books, or come find me and I'll give you a more detailed response that isn't going to chew up all my bandwidth. But for now, just this is what you need to know. And it will be on the AP test, but as long as you know that, and more or less, that's fine. And then that's the money market graph. Again, here's a cleaner version. Money market. There we go. And that's loanable funds. And the difference, again, is the supply of money is fixed, but the supply of loanable funds is not, because we might move money in or out of banks, which doesn't change this, but does change this. All right. Thanks a lot.